Thank you, Devanshi, for kirtan. And welcome everyone to this evening's Bhagavad-Gita class. My great pleasure to be here. I live in the USA, and I'm just here for a few days, so I was very honored when Lavanga Mataji came and asked me to give class. So always a pleasure to speak on Krishna's words from Bhagavad-Gita. And today we're going to be covering chapter 6, texts 19 to 23. So we'll do 19 responsively here. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. Please chant. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. Vaishnavis. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. Yata-dīpo nivāta-stho neṅgate sopamā smṛtā yogino yata-cittasya yuñjato yogam ātmanaḥ. All right, let's do the word for word. Yata, as. Dīpaḥ, a lamp. Nivāta-sthaḥ, in a place without wind. Na, does not. Iṅgate, waver. Sa, this. Upamā, comparison. smṛtā, is considered. Yoginaḥ, of the yogi. Yata-cittasya, whose mind is controlled. Yuñjataḥ, constantly engaged. Yogam, in meditation. ātmanaḥ, on transcendence. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist, whose mind is controlled, remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. There's a very short purport here. A truly Krishna-conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. So, before we go to the next verses, I have a little demonstration here. So I brought a candle so you can observe the lamp in the windless place. Let's see. I don't know how windless it is here. Okay, so here's a lamp in a slight, more or less windless place. So you can see how there's some wind here. AC's going. What's going to burn it? What's going on with this? Let's put it over here. Okay. So you can see the candle flame, how it's shaped, that it's shaped like this, and then goes up to a point. So like that, a person who's a transcendentalist, especially the bhakti yogi in Krishna consciousness, knows how to integrate everything in our lives so that everything that we do is focused on one point, which is Krishna. So there are all the different things. I could maybe just draw a picture. So here's the candle flame here of our life. And this is Krishna. So everything that we do, so let's say there's our career, there's our education, there's our family, there's our eating, there's our recreation, there's our social life, every aspect of life, whatever you can, in a devotee's life, everything is just going towards the goal of Krishna. So that the extent, so we work for Krishna. Our recreation is something that's related to Krishna. Our education is, we're learning Shastra, or we're getting some kind of academic education, which is to be used in Krishna's service. Our family is Krishna conscious family life. Our social life, our friends, are devotees. How do we socialize with them? By kirtan, by hearing and discussing and relishing Bhagavad-Gita together, by doing services together, organizing festivals, doing preaching programs. So everything that we do is just focused on one point, Krishna. And so the candle flame here is steady. It's going to just one point. So whenever something that we do is not focused on Krishna, then it causes the flame to waver. So it's like, let's say, for recreation, instead of going to kirtan with devotees, you go and watch a movie, some like non-devotional movie. So then that causes the flame to go one way or the other. Or let's say that you have some non-devotee friends that you hang out with and you just kind of do some, maya together with sometimes. Then the candle flame is again wavering. It's going here, there. It's not going to Krishna, it's going to something else. Or one day you see something that's not really offerable to Krishna, but you really want to eat it, and you just indulge the tongue in something enjoyable. Then again, the candle's wavering. And so it's going from side to side, and if it wavers too much, then what happens? It goes out, and our spiritual life just goes up in smoke. So we have to be very careful to keep the focus on Krishna and not allow it to waver. And to understand the danger and to be alert to when our spiritual life is starting to waver. And when we feel it going a little bit off track, to quickly pull it back to the center, to make adjustments so that it comes back to the center. So that's what Krishna is talking about here when he says, as a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. So in whatever we're doing, the focus is on the transcendent self, that I am a soul, and the purpose of my life is to connect with Krishna. The goal is Krishna. Everything's focused on that, and mind is controlled in everything that we do. So then in the next set of verses, text 20 to 23, Krishna is going to say, so one who has achieved that, one who has achieved everything in life focused on Krishna, and that it's fixed like that, is not wavering, what happens? What is their experience of life like? And so we can, I'll just read this. It's 4 verses here. 4, 3, 20 to 23. Okay, so I'll just read through the Sanskrit here. Maybe we can do it in unison. Just, scroll down to the Sanskrit verses. English version, yeah, because this is the English class. Go to the, the letters, the English alphabet letters. Just scroll, Prabhu. Keep scrolling. There we go. Okay. So can we do this in unison? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Let's do it. Yatra paramate chittam nirudham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyan atmani tushyati sukham atyantikam yattat buddhi grahyam atindriyam veti yatra na chaivayam stitas chalati tattvataha yam labdva chaparam labham manyate nadikatata yasmin stito nadukena guru napi vichalyate tam vidya dukkha samyogo viyugam yoga samgitam. Jai. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. So I'll read the translation here. In the stage of perfection called trance, so this is when life is all focused on Krishna and fixed in Krishna consciousness in everything we do, then our life becomes a trance. It becomes samadhi. Samadhi means constant absorption in one thing, which is Krishna. So in the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from the material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. So this is the first thing that happens. When we refrain from any kind of material activities and we're only engaged in Krishna consciousness, then the result here is that we're able to see the self, which means we're able to actually see ourselves as souls and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. So there's quite a long purport here. We'll just read through this and then we can discuss some points. So, Srila Prabhupada writes, by practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence without any misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the supersoul, and the monists think this to be liberation, but they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist, but in this verse, transcendental pleasure realized through transcendental senses is accepted. And this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras 334, Purushartho shunyanam gunanam pratiprasavaha kaivalyam swarupa pratishta vachiti shaktir iti. This chitti shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and at the end the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called kaivalyam by the monist. But according to Patanjali, this kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of his constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Chaito Darpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actual liberation, or Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. The theory of nirvana, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam 2.10.6, this is called Swarupena Vyavashtitihi. The Bhagavad-Gita also confirms this situation in this verse. After nirvana, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, Swarupena Vyavashtitihi, this is the real life of the living entity. Maya, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words Kaivalyam Swarupa Pratishta Va Chitti Shaktir Iti. This Chitti Shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as Ananda Mayo Bhyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga, and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service or bhakti-yoga. Bhakti-yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. In the yoga system as described in this chapter, there are two kinds of samadhi, called sampragyata samadhi and asampragyata samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical researches, he is said to achieve sampragyata samadhi. In the asampragyata samadhi, there is no longer any connection with material pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted to siddhis, perfections, in the process of yoga, are not perfectly situated. If yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection, as is stated in this verse. Persons therefore indulging in the make-show practice of gymnastic feats or siddhis should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age is Kṛṣṇa consciousness, which is not baffling. A Kṛṣṇa conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing hatha yoga, dhyana yoga, and jnana yoga, but there is no problem in executing karma yoga or bhakti yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. But a person who is in pure bhakti yoga or in Kṛṣṇa consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Kṛṣṇa consciousness. He is callous towards incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he is always alert to execute his duties in Kṛṣṇa consciousness or bhakti yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. As stated in Bhagavad-Gita 2:14, agama payino nityas tams titikshasva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ooh, that was a lengthy purport. So let me just say a little Mangala Charanam. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swaparantikam Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadesha Tarne Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai. So in these verses here, Krishna is describing the perfectional stage of yoga, which is perfect Kṛṣṇa consciousness. And so he uses the word meditation, that one becomes, let's see, he says, yeah. So here we're talking about dhyana yoga, which is the yoga of meditation. But as we were saying, that for a Kṛṣṇa conscious devotee, our whole life is a meditation. Right? That Krishna told Arjuna, think of me and fight. Right? Mam smaram ayudyo. Mam anusmaram yudyo cha. He says, think of me, go on thinking of me. Not just remember me, but anusmaram, go on remembering me and fight. So whether we're fighting, whether we're cooking, whether we're driving, whether we're giving a class, whether we're washing pots or cleaning the floor or worshipping the deity, whatever we're doing, anusmaram, Krishna anusmaranam. We should be continuing to remember Krishna so that everything that we do becomes a meditation and focused on Krishna. So our meditation is not just what we do during japa when we're trying to control the mind and think of Krishna during japa, but everything that we do in our lives should be this meditation, should be a samadhi, should be absorption, this state of samadhi that Krishna is talking about in this verse. So then, Krishna mentions that what happens when we attain this state of samadhi is that we come to see the self by the pure mind, that we see the self and we become satisfied. He says, tushyati. Tushyati means satisfaction. When we see the self, we become satisfied. And the other thing is sukham atyantikam. Sukham means happiness, and atyantikam means unending. We achieve this unending transcendental happiness. And why? Because when we see the self and we realize ourselves to be souls, not these bodies, not these minds, and not even our intelligence, and certainly not our false ego, but actually souls, then naturally we're going to be joyful because the nature of the soul is to be joyful. The soul is a part and parcel of Krishna, who is the supreme enjoyer. So the supreme enjoyer is always joyful, and the parts and parcels of the supreme enjoyer also enjoy life with the supreme enjoyer. So the soul is of the same quality of Krishna, which is Sat Chit Ananda. That's what we're made of. Our existence is eternal, is full of knowledge, and is full of bliss. That's literally like that's the fabric that we're cut from. That we're cut from the fabric of Sat Chit Ananda. So if we're not happy, then it's because we're not fully understanding who we are. And of course, full understanding of the self entails understanding Krishna. Because we can't know ourselves without knowing Krishna, because who are we? Lord Chaitanya says, Jivera Swarapahor Krishnara Nityadas. So the soul, the identification of the soul is Krishna Nityadas, the eternal servant of Krishna. So as soon as I see myself, I have to see who I am, not just what kind of substance I'm made from, but actually who am I? Like, what is my personality? What is my identity? What is my purpose of life? What do I do? And so I can understand, yes, okay, I'm a spiritual being, but really, who am I? So who am I? I'm a servant of Krishna. So real self-realization includes God realization. And that's why in the science of self-realization, it starts with Krishna, and it ends with Krishna, and it's permeated by Krishna. Because self-realization it doesn't exist without God realization. Because we are made of nothing but God in that sense, right? The parts and parcels, just like the spark is nothing but fire, this drop of water is nothing but the ocean. So in the same way, the soul is nothing but Krishna, but in a very minute quantity. And our relationship with the supreme whole is that of the servant, eternal servant. Krishna says that the bliss that we experience, this happiness, is not like material happiness. It's way beyond material happiness. He uses the word atindriyam, which means beyond the senses. So we've all experienced sense gratification, and we know what that's like. But when we realize the self, when we realize our relationship with Krishna, like fully on the spiritual transcendental platform, we experience a happiness which is just way beyond any sense pleasure that we've ever experienced before. So he says, buddhi grahyam atindriyam, that with our intelligence we can grasp that. With our intelligence we can understand that this happiness that I'm feeling is this is nothing to do with the senses. This is nothing material. This is completely transcendental. It's not, if I would try to analyze it from a material point of view, it wouldn't even make sense. Right? Like sometimes we feel very happy, just ecstatic in Krishna consciousness, and if you try to like take a step back from it afterwards and be like, why was I so happy doing that? Like, let's say you're down in the kitchen, like some basement kitchen in one of our Hare Krishna temples, scrubbing pots all day. You got this mountain of... And one time I was like, that was my service when I was in London temple, like for Sunday feast, we would volunteer all the Sankirtan. I was a Sankirtan devotee, but on Sunday we wouldn't go out. We would all volunteer to wash the pots for the Sunday feast. So all of us Sankirtan girls were down there in the kitchen. It was in the basement, no windows. It was just like the floor was just wet and slimy. And there was this sprayer and these huge pots that we could barely lift, and like an endless supply of them. And we're just in there with like a head inside the pot, scrubbing with a steel wool. And it like took two of us to like put it under the tap and turn it upside down so we could rinse it. And it was like heavy work. But we were just chanting Hare Krishna the whole time, singing, having ecstatic kirtan, and just being blissed out. And it's just like if somebody would come and be like, how is it possible that you were in this dark dungeon on this slimy floor in this hot, steamy room and, working like a dog and soaking wet with like dirty dishwater and just like ecstatic? It just doesn't make sense from the material point of view. And I remember one time too, I was on Sankirtan in London in this market called Borough Market. It's a very like upscale market where all like the rich people go to buy their like exotic foods. And they have all these really like, cold pressed fresh juices and, exotic meats and wines and cheeses and all these very expensive fine foods. So I remember it was around Christmas time, a Christmas marathon, and I was standing there in Prabhupada Marathon. I was distributing books. And it was really cold. It was windy. And I was standing in a place that was like this train overpass was right over me. So it's kind of noisy and there was like a lot of exhaust there. But I couldn't do inside the market because we'd get kicked out. So I had to be outside this place that wasn't so like pleasant to stand in. And then there's all these people, rich people, going to this place that's supposed to be full of sense pleasures. Like all the sense pleasures are there. There was like live music. There were, nice people and all the good things to buy. And they all had money to enjoy it. And the coffee house and the pub was there and everything. Like everything materially to be happy. And then I looked around after a while and I was like distributing books. And I was just smiling and talking to people and books and donations. And I was by myself. I was all alone out there. And I was thinking, I'm the happiest person here in this market right now. These people are miserable. So it's like they're going there doing everything materially conceivable to be happy. And they're just like frustrated and miserable, And here I am just like approaching people to try to give them books that they don't even want and asking people for money and standing in a bad place in cold weather and on my feet and all day. And I was just blissed out. And I said, these people are breaking all the 4 regular principles right here on the spot, thinking it's going to make them happy. And it's like, no. So there's just material logic doesn't work. It's just not the way to happiness. And as devotees, we have to also be careful because sometimes we can fall into the trap of thinking that, if I have a little bit of a softer bed, I'll be happy. Or maybe if I have better food, I'll be happy. Or maybe if I, install an AC in my house, I'll be happy. Or maybe I'll just move to a country that has a better climate. Or, get me a new pair of shoes or something. A new sari. Yeah. So sometimes we can think that making material adjustments in our life is going to make us happy. But actually it doesn't work. That's what the materialists try to do, and they get frustrated at every turn. Happiness only comes from Kṛṣṇa consciousness and from realizing the self and realizing our eternal connection with Kṛṣṇa as his servants and engaging in service with the right consciousness. So those are all important. And Kṛṣṇa says that the transcendental joy that we experience from service. Actually, right here in this verse, as it uses the term in the first line, it says yoga sevaya. Yoga sevaya. So sevaya means seva, means service, and yoga means connection or to link. So this is our link, that we link to Kṛṣṇa through seva, through service. And he says that the bliss, the transcendental joy that we experience from this yoga sevaya, from linking to Kṛṣṇa through devotional service, is so satisfying that he says, yam labdva cha param labham, that having attained this state of transcendental joy, we think there's nothing more to attain. I don't need anything else in my life. I'm completely satisfied. And that's why you can see that that's how these great devotees, like you see the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, they were just wearing, loincloths, sleeping under trees, but totally absorbed in service. They didn't need anything. We went to Sanatana Goswami's Samadhi today, and we were hearing about how, he was just begging for some atta and mixing it with Yamuna water and making some dough balls, cooking that in the fire and just offering that to his deity. And that's all he was eating. Just like some hard dough balls cooked in a fire with not even salt. And that was enough that was okay for him. He didn't need anything else because his happiness wasn't coming from his plate, it was coming from Kṛṣṇa, from his realizing, from his state of samadhi, of absorption in Kṛṣṇa consciousness. So he wasn't looking for any kind of external situation for fulfillment, because he was completely filled and to the point of overflowing, filled to overflowing. And the other thing that Kṛṣṇa says here is yasmin stito nadukena guru napi vichalyate. So yasmin stito means thus situated in this state of transcendence, of samadhi. Nadukena guruna api. So dukena means miseries. So he's saying even if there are miseries, and even if guruna api, even if their guru means guru, spiritual master, but guru also means heavy. Right? Guru, the word guru is a synonym. It means heavy. So even if those miseries, that dukena is heavy difficulties, like heavy difficulties, even if the person in the transcendental situations is having heavy difficulties in their life. And Prabhupada gives some examples in the Purport. He says maybe there's disease, maybe there's an accident or injury, maybe there's the death of a loved one. Heavy difficulties, even though they may be there, but vichalyate, he doesn't budge, he's not shaken. Prabhupada says he's not shaken. Like chal means moved, like chalye, let's move, let's make a move, let's go. But vichalyate means no, he doesn't. Na vichalyate means he doesn't go away from Krishna's lotus feet. He doesn't budge an inch from the devotional service of Kṛṣṇa. Unflinching devotional service. And then, so how is it possible? How is it possible that you can experience heavy difficulties in your life and not be affected by them? And not lose faith or not lose determination in your service? So Kṛṣṇa explains that in the last line. He says, this is very poetic. He says, dukkha samyoga viyogam. So by this yoga seva, by linking to Kṛṣṇa through devotional service, then the dukkha samyoga, the link to miseries, becomes viyogam. It becomes unlinked. So the misery link, it literally means the dukkha yogam becomes viyogam. The misery link becomes unlinked. So the miseries are all around us. So many bad things are happening in the world, in our lives, maybe in our own bodies, maybe in our own minds. There's so many miseries, right? Adhyatmika, adhibodhika, adidaivika kleshas that are always there because it's the material world and that's the nature of the material energy. But the devotee is not affected by those miseries because they're not connected. They're aloof. Prabhupada in the Purport uses the word callous. Like callous means those hard skin that you get on your hands when you're working, like a farmer is using a pitchfork or a shovel or something and working with tools in the field, and he builds this hard skin on the hands. So then even when he's working hard with those tools, he doesn't feel it. He doesn't feel any pain because he's got the hard skin. So, but if somebody who doesn't have calluses, they go out there and they try to shovel the dirt all day, they're going to get blisters and sore, and they won't be able to use their hands for a couple of days while their hands heal. So the devotee becomes callous or becomes aloof. It's kind of like, let me go back to the picture here that I drew. So this is, remember, everything that we do, work, education, social life, family, recreation, everything is focused on Kṛṣṇa. So then the devotee is kind of in this bubble, right? Like in this bliss bubble of transcendental joy, which is atindriyam, which is beyond the senses, with Kṛṣṇa. So this is a devotee's life, everything connected to Kṛṣṇa. And in the Purport, Prabhupada talked about kaivalyam, which means like the liberation or oneness. But this is the real kaivalyam, which is kevala bhakti, or just one-pointed, ekaha kruvanandana, Kṛṣṇa eka sharanam, or Kṛṣṇa kaivalyam, the one-pointed focus on Kṛṣṇa. So when we're in this bubble with Kṛṣṇa, then outside there may be so many disturbances, right? There's grouchy people, there's, accidents, there's bad weather, clouds, there's whatever, there's all kinds of maladies and miseries and negative things out here that are going on. But this bubble here is kind of like a semi-permeable membrane or a selectively permeable membrane. You might remember those kind of terms from biology class. So through this, things can go out, right? So the devotee is callous and aloof, but is not oblivious to the external world. So devotee who has Kṛṣṇa, who is satisfied in Kṛṣṇa consciousness, is overflowing, right? Like the cup, the happiness is overflowing. It is going to all these poor, suffering people out here. So it's going out to try to help the world to become happy. But a devotee also perceives the suffering of others, right? Devotee's paradukkha dukhi. So it's coming in to the extent that the devotee is melting with compassion. And that's causing this happiness to flow out to these people. But at the same time, the miseries of the material world are not going this far to touching the heart of the devotee to disturb their bhakti. So that's not happening. It's just they're remaining outside. They're getting blocked here by Krishna's protection. It's kind of like a shield, like a Lakshman Rekha. That Sita could go out, but others couldn't come in. The line that Lakshman drew around the cottage, like that. So the dukkha, without Krishna consciousness, this is not here. So all these miseries are coming in and affecting people, right? The mental disturbances, the physical disturbances, the natural disturbances, the social disturbances, the political disturbances, they're all going in. But as soon as the Krishna consciousness is here, it forms this bubble, this permeable bubble that those things can't get in and they can't disturb us. So without this, then that dukkha samyoga is there. We're linked to miseries. So anyone who's not a devotee is like linked to miseries. That's their connection. They connect with the miseries of life. They identify with the miseries of life. Like, I am sick. I am depressed. I have a problematic life. Right? Like, they strongly identify with those things, and they often develop like a victim mentality that, everybody's against me, everybody hates me, and I'm just doomed, or whatever. My life is a mess. What can I do? Feel sorry for themselves. So they're linked to miseries. But when we come to the state of transcendental joy and Krishna consciousness, then that link to miseries becomes unlinked. As we let go. We just let go of the miseries. And we identify with Krishna. We identify that I'm a happy soul. And that I'm totally aloof. That I actually have nothing to do with this material world. I have my service here. That's spiritual. While I'm here, I'm, like Prabhupada said, making the best use of a bad bargain. Somehow I foolishly came to this world. I accepted this material body, which is, not very Satchidananda at all. So I'm in this contraption that gives me a lot of trouble, but at least let me use it. Make the best use of a bad bargain means let me use it in Krishna's service, right? Use my mind to think of how to spread Krishna consciousness, my intelligence to understand Shastra, my senses to physically perform devotional services, my voice to chant, to speak Krishna Katha. So using everything in Krishna's service, then we become connected to Krishna and disconnected from the miseries. And so that's the science of living in a happy life in Krishna consciousness. And we can achieve that through the processes of bhakti-yoga. Chanting the holy names, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, worshipping the deity, associating with devotees, living in a holy place, a pilgrimage, living in a temple or near in a temple community, visiting the holy dhams whenever we can. These 5 potent processes, especially Panchanga Bhakti, the 5 potent limbs of devotional service, if we really focus on these as our daily practices, then we can very quickly come to this state of transcendence, of samadhi, and be able to disconnect from miseries by connecting everything to Krishna. And this is the real liberation. And Srila Prabhupada translates it that this indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. And as we continue in this way, then our perception of the self, because we're talking about we see the self first as a spiritual being, and then as a servant of Krishna. But as we continue, we get more and more clarity on our actual relationship with Krishna, our swarup. Prabhupada mentions here that he's quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam 2.10.6, where Krishna defined that chapter 10 of the 2nd canto is called Srimad Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And the first verse, 2.10.1, the 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam are mentioned, and then in the subsequent verses they're defined. So one of the topics is mukti, liberation, and in 2.10.6, this is the verse that Prabhupada quotes here, the definition for mukti is given, and he partially quotes it here, it's swarupena vyavashtita, that one realizes one's swarup. That's real liberation. So that's what Krishna is talking about here, that freedom from all miseries arising from material contact, with this state of liberation, of transcendence, culminates in one realizing one's swarup, one's particular individual, eternal, constitutional position in the service of Krishna in the spiritual world. So we just need to keep going with our sadhana and with our services, our yoga seva, stay connected to Krishna through seva, and all these will gradually be able to overcome the material energy and its miseries, disconnect from this miserable material existence, and while continuing to be compassionate and help others who are situated within it, and steadily making more and more advancement closer and closer to Krishna and realizing our relationship with him. So I'll stop here and take any questions or comments. We have just like 12 minutes. Yes, Priya Mataji.
Thank you. Really, I appreciate you going into the Sanskrit. It's very enlivening and stimulating. And it made me think of how I experience, at least I think I experience, that material life can be sukha samyoga. A material situation, a material fix can give me great pleasure. My laptop was broken, I just solved it before this class, and I felt this rush of satisfaction. But I know it's just a material fix, and it's not really going to solve my problem. So what should we do when we recognize that we still feel happiness from material fixes?
Well, the thing is, you just use your laptop for your service to Krishna, right? You're doing Bhakti Vaibhava online, so you need your laptop for hearing their Bhakti Vaibhava classes. So, for a devotee who's using material things in the service of Krishna, when those material things are not working, then, that becomes an obstruction in what you're trying to do in your service to Krishna. Of course, there's no material impediment to devotional service, because devotional service is basically, thinking of Krishna. You can always think of Krishna. But externally, we have certain duties and commitments and responsibilities. So, if your laptop is broken and you can't hear your class, that's like a disruption in your duties, your spiritual duties as a Bhakti Vaibhava student. So then naturally you're going to feel happy when it's fixed, because you're like, yay, now I can hear my class and participate. So So it's not material, that's the thing. Right? Everything, as long as everything's in Krishna's service, everything is with the goal of Krishna, right? The candle flame is going there to Krishna. Then it's no longer material. It's like that verse here, Bhagavad-Gita 4:24, where Krishna says, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam Brahmaiva Tena Gantavyam Brahmakarma Samadhina. It's the same word, samadhi. See? So he says that. So what he's saying here is the Sanskrit for this verse is really cool. Brahma means spiritual. Says Brahma, Prabhupada translates spiritual in nature. So arpanam means the offering, right? The offering. So the offering, whatever it is that you're offering, that's spiritual. And he's using a metaphor here. The Sanskrit alludes to a metaphor of a fire yagya. So in the fire yagya, there's an offering that's being done, and generally it's ghee. So the word here is havi, which means butter. So he says the butter that you offer into the fire is also spiritual. And the fire is also spiritual. And the person who's doing the offering is also spiritual. And the sacrifice itself is also spiritual. And by doing this spiritual thing with all these spiritual ingredients and spiritual process, then that spiritual person, by their spiritual activity, is going to the spiritual kingdom. That's what by absorption, by samadhi in Brahma karma, in spiritual activities. So in the same way, so if you're using your laptop for service, then the laptop also becomes spiritual, just like the butter that you're offering into the fire. The butter is spiritual, the fire is spiritual, the yogya that you made was spiritual, the spoon, the ladle that you're ladling is spiritual. So in the same way, all of the items of paraphernalia that we use in our service also become these. Prabhupada translates, a person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. So the absorption. So the key is to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And then whatever we're doing, whatever we're using, just becomes part and parcel of that spiritual absorption and becomes spiritual itself. And then it actually does bring us happiness. Yes, Prabhu.
Just your example, say if it wasn't the laptop or it wasn't something engaged in Krishna's service, it wasn't material, we're doing it, it gave us that spark of happiness. I guess, so it's just up to us to be aware enough that it's not true happiness, that is on the material platform, and to realise that, like, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
This wasn't in Krishna's.
Well, it's a kind of happiness, but it's temporary. It's chapala sukha. Right? That in the beginning of Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada talks about, when he's talking about ras, he talks about bhakti ras, but he also says there's a mundane ras. There's actually a taste that we get from even mundane activities, like earning money and maintaining your family. There's a little sense there's some taste there of those relationships and those activities, but it's temporary. Yeah, and he says it's chapala, it's flickering happiness. So it flickers for a while, and while it's flickering, you think, oh, I get some light there, I can see some, and then it just goes out, and it's gone. So all these mundane happiness is very temporary, it's fleeting, doesn't last for long. Mundane relationships, they'll give you happiness for a while, but they give you so much pain too. Whereas spiritual relationships, they're just always uplifting and inspiring. So yeah, it's not. We're not going to deny and say that there's nothing there, because there's something that we experience some little pleasure there in material things, but it's just compare. Also, Nectar Devotion, Rupa Goswami talks about different kinds of happiness. So he said there's happiness from sense gratification. There's happiness from Brahman realization, and there's happiness from devotional service. So he says that happiness from sense gratification is like a drop of water in the desert. So if you're in a desert, there's no water, it's boiling hot, you're totally dehydrated, and then somebody gives you a tiny little drop of water, you're like, oh, I got some water. You try to sip it, and before you can even sip it, it like evaporates in your hand. You know, it's just like this hope. Or if you manage to touch it to your lips, maybe there's a little bit of like your parched, dry lips get a little bit of moisture on you, like, you know, but it's immediately like you're just totally desiccated again the next second. So that's happiness from sense gratification. There's like some hope, maybe some little tiny drop of something, but it doesn't satisfy the heart and soul doesn't at all. And then the happiness from Brahman realization, it's compared to the water in a hoofprint of a calf. So it's a lot more than a drop. Maybe you could do something with that water, and maybe there's a cup or something of water there that you could do something with. But it's not sufficient. You know, you can't really, it's not satisfying to the soul, and the quantity is so small. But the happiness that comes from devotional service, from pure devotional service, is it's like the ocean. It's practically unlimited, boundless, transcendental happiness. So that's what we're after. That's the only happiness that's going to actually satisfy the soul. Nothing else is going to satisfy. It just gives some false hope, some temporary, you know, it basically the happiness they get in material life is just enough to keep us going from one misery to the next. You know, it's like, I'm so miserable, and then something good happens. Oh, okay, I can survive. I don't have to kill myself. And then something else miserable happens. And you're like, oh God, life just got so hard. What am I going to do? Oh, but something, you know, it's like it's so hot. It's like in the month of May or something in Vrindavan, it's so hot, right? It's like in the 40s, 45 degrees day after day. And it's like, how could I tolerate? I'm going to die. Oh, but hey, the mangoes are becoming ripe. You know, it's mango season. Yay. There's something to live for. So even for the materialists, there's something that kind of like keeps them, dragging them over the coals of material life. So yeah, but it's just temporary, and the mangoes are done by September. So yeah, somebody else had a question, Devanshi.
You mentioned about this Kṛṣṇa vichalyate. So you were talking about that even if the difficulties are really heavy in the life of a transcendental or devotee, he doesn't get affected. So my question is, like, what kind of thinking does he has in his mind so that he does not get affected? Like, what is going through his mind? Like, is he consciously thinking so that he doesn't get affected?
Yeah, so when bad things happen, this is a very good question. How does a devotee think? So Prabhupada writes in one purport that when something bad happens, we think, actually, due to my sinful lifetimes of sin and materialistic thoughts and activities, I deserve so much more misery. But Krishna is so kind that he's just giving me a token, little token suffering, just to remind me that this material world is not the place to enjoy, just to remind me of the nature of this world, and to induce me to take more and more shelter of him, to induce me to let go of the hope from enjoying materially and to take shelter of Krishna. So there's a lot of people, they don't think about God when they're happy. They think about God only when they're suffering. And therefore, Krishna arranges suffering so that they will come to Krishna consciousness, so that they'll pray, so that they'll take shelter. So devotee thinks this is just a token, and this is just a curative treatment administered personally by the hand of the Lord in order to induce me to let go of this false hope for material happiness and take full shelter of Krishna and engage myself more intensely in Krishna's service, knowing that that's the only solution to all problems. So everything, even these difficulties, are Krishna's mercy. And if we go through them like that, then eventually the difficulties also pass. That's one good thing about the material world. Happiness is temporary, but suffering is also temporary. So if you don't like your situation, just wait a little bit. The suffering will also go away. The disease will be healed. The weather's going to change, like that. People come into our life and they go out of our lives. So the situation's always changing. But everything is Krishna's mercy. So after, when we've passed through some difficult phase and we look back on it and we think, wow, that was actually, that ended up being such a good thing. That was actually probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because thanks to that difficulty, I was able to grow. I was able to have a lot of realizations. I was able to make some adjustments in my life so that I'm now in a situation which is much more favorable for my bhakti And I've come so much closer to Kṛṣṇa. And I've come to have so much more faith and trust in Kṛṣṇa and the devotees who helped me through that. Okay, so it's 6:30. I was told that we need to end at 6:30 on the dot because apparently there's some other event that's happening in this room here. So thank you all for your attendance and listening and your questions. Bhagavad-Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanandi, Hari Hari Bo.